Sorry for the delay, but I've had a few technical difficulties. But let me just quickly share with you what I'm looking at or what I'm talking about. I keep an eye on Gert and what he's saying, and his most recent presentation was on the 7th of July 2025. A pat on the back on the way to the gallows. And this is his Substack post, so you can take a look at his Substack if you want. He has a number of posts there, a lot of interaction. As much as I like Gert's Substack, remember that you can also join my Substack. That's in the link below if you want to do that. So before I do a quick analysis of it, I just wanted to remind you that coming up in the next few days, COVID boosters, are they putting you at risk? This is looking at IgG4 and IgG2. Strange combination that is almost mirroring what happens with regards to parasitic infections. And again, sometimes people think this is no longer relevant to them. My way of looking at this is that if it's relevant to your loved ones, you should be aware as to what could be happening. And so if you want to join me, look at the link in the description below. But back to a quick overview as to what Geert had said with regards to this Substack. A pat on the back on the way to the gallows. So, if you're not familiar with what Geert has been talking about since 2021, he's been focused on the dangers of mass vaccination. I was the first person to interview him, and it was a fascinating interview. Up to today's over 1.6 million views. So his concern has always been that by vaccinating in a pandemic, you're going to drive viral variants. Now, there's still some in the scientific community who still don't agree with what he's saying, even though we're having variant after variant after variant after variant. They think that this is just normal, but this is not happening in places like Africa or Haiti or Papua New Guinea. So, based on just anecdotal real world evidence, I would say he was right. And so, within that context, Gert, who is a vaccinologist, so it's not that he is against vaccines, he's very much pro vaccine, but he believes that when he sees something that is wrong, he needs to stand up and make sure he protects the science. And so, for the past 4 years, he's been doing that with great criticism from many in the scientific community, notwithstanding the fact that what he's predicting seems to be occurring. So one of the problems or one of the issues that he raised was that there is likely to be a viral variant of COVID variant that could sweep through and do huge damage to the population. And when we think about timelines, I've always been careful and cautious about that because I remember what it looked like in the pandemic, where you would think something happened, it didn't seem to happen. But then down the line, maybe sometimes 6 months, a year later, you see the pattern that you expected with the SARS. And so within that, it looks to me that this is a similar picture as to what he's expecting. So even in the absence of immune pressure or adaptation, any mutation or combination that further suppresses both antiviral and inflammatory components of innate immunity could severely weaken this most non-specific line of immune defense. So, in a sense, he is saying that immune defense across the population has been significantly weakened. And this is as we see more and more variants coming out. The latest one here is the XFG variant. And this variant, which is largely in East Asia at the moment, is now spreading across the world. What I'd say to people is that if you remember what happened with the Delta variant, when the Delta variant came out of India, a lot of people thought it was just an Indian problem. But very quickly it swept the world and was one of the most serious variants that occurred. And so, in the same way, I am looking at this FXG variant And to be frank, I'm following a very unusual pattern in a part of India where there have been a significant number of heart related deaths. And I have a feeling that this is a predictor as to what is going to happen next. And so Gert is concerned about these variants because he believes that eventually one will come along and trigger unchecked viral replication. So when you combine the failing adaptive immunity, which would result in immune tolerance, and this is what I'm talking about in the next tomorrow, talking about IgG4 and IgG2, that's the immune tolerance, and consequently trigger unchecked viral replication and dissemination of the virus within the host. And this was always happening. It's just that nobody knows because they're not doing autopsies. But one of the very early autopsy series in 2022 demonstrated that we have dissemination of the virus within those who are vaccinated and infected. And it's this kind of pattern that keeps getting overlooked and not being answered in a serious way. So we have huge problems ahead of us. It's just that, in my view, it's not easy to predict how this is going to look. Based on what I'm doing, is that I tend to try and parallel what's happening clinically and reflect on how this fits with the science. And what I see from a clinical point of view is that people have very mild infections. And that mild infection is very often ignored in many people. But sometimes 3 weeks, a month down the line, they can have very serious disease. And there is no connection between the two. And so nobody realizes that this is probably going to be COVID related. And this is what the Denmark data showed us. The Denmark data showed us that within 30 days of a COVID infection where someone was admitted, there was 12% mortality in that vaccinated cohort. So there is something going on. Look at what else Garrett had been saying here. He was saying that he actually had one of the variants, a hoarse voice with accompanying sore throat. He thinks it was one of the XFG subvariants called the Strauss variant. This is the one in Asia that is very mild symptoms. And what he's saying is, as long as the cell mediated innate immunity, mainly in the unvaccinated, remains intact, or if in the vaccinated they have adaptive immunity, they can eliminate the virus or prevent symptoms. But the point is that in a lot of people, it seems that this infection is not so obvious, but it does damage the immune system in the medium term. So these are some very important trajectories in terms of what is happening. So what Gert is looking out for, and I'm trying to try and find it here in this presentation, he is expecting at some point that there is going to be a viral variant. And so he says the inevitable consequences are sharp rise in chronic infections. This is already happening. With an explosion of new mutations, this is already happening, with recombination of the variants. And then when we have that situation happening, because SARS-CoV-2 damages immunity, eventually immunity will drop to such a critically low level that massive viral invasion and spread, both within individual hosts and between them, can no longer be prevented. And this is technically what he's anticipating to happen. But what I have said, and I said it to Garrett even at the last time I spoke with him, is I think this is already happening. But again, because there is no clear connection between the symptoms. So in the past, when you had severe COVID-19, what frightened people was that you had an infection and within a week you were in hospital with breathing problems. That's a very close correlation of symptoms and presentation. And when that happens, people get afraid. However, suppose you have a very mild infection, and yet in 3 to 4 weeks, you still end up in hospital with some other kind of serious health condition, not necessarily respiratory, could be cardiac, could be renal, could be brain. Because people don't see the connection, they are not worried. And it's a very strange thing that happens. It's what happens when you boil a frog. If you drop him in hot water, he jumps out, which is like what happened with severe COVID-19. Everybody panicked because they saw the clear correlation. However, if you put the frog in tap water and then put a fire under it, he will adapt until he's boiled to death. So at the moment, the population has become so used to the fact that they perceive that COVID is a nothing burger that even though hospitals are overloaded, if you look anywhere in the first world, I guarantee you will find that every hospital system is under pressure. Excess deaths are not coming down, even though so many people have died in the pandemic. And you will know a lot of people who are sick. And you keep on hearing about it. And this is the pattern that is occurring. I describe it not like a storm, but it's more like a tide coming in. You're standing out in the water is rushing in, you're not taking it seriously because it's still around your ankles, but if you don't move quickly, it will soon be at your waist. That's where we are moving at the moment, where there is a significant trajectory in terms of the ongoing circulation of virus. Nobody's taking it too seriously because they can't see the direct correlation of infection. And as a result, everyone is sleepwalking into the most serious phase of the pandemic, which I think is coming over the next few years. That's a challenge we have. It's one of those times where I don't mind being wrong. But sadly, the science points to the fact that we have a long way to go. Thank you.